This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Stefan Falk. His new book, Intrinsic Motivation, Learn to Love Your Work and Succeed as Never Before. Stefan brings an attitude that we need. It's an attitude missing in society. It's that can-do attitude. You must do attitude. Find a way to make every day exciting. Don't be boring. Don't be a complainer. Don't whine. Stefan, as a performance coach, has worked with just about everyone under the sun, and I am lucky to keep bringing on guests like this. Guests that first and foremost stimulate me. And I like to think if I'm stimulated, you, the audience, will be stimulated. At least that's my somewhat cocky perspective. Without any further delay, let's jump right in with my guest today, Stefan Falk, and talk intrinsic motivation. Stefan, I'm not a football fan in the international football fan sense of the word. But yesterday, here in the States, with a friend who loves international football, of course, we watched the World Cup final. And I'm glad I watched the World Cup final because that was one of the best sporting events that I've seen in a long time. Most American guys, we grew up playing other things. But that was a hell of an event. And especially, and I don't know where you and I are going to go with this, but to watch the two, clearly there was two on the field that were at a level obscenely higher, Mbappe and Messi. I mean, just amazing to watch two guys at that level in the same game. And the mental side was what impressed me. As an outsider to the sport, to watch those two guys, their minds seem to be moving in slow motion compared to other people.
First of all, I actually didn't see the match. I saw certain highlights from it because I was actually working and stuff. But it's interesting. I think that both of them, when they perform at that level, they are in what I call the Matrix moment. You have seen the movie The Matrix, when Neo, everything slows down and he can sort of, navigate effortlessly in what situation, the bullets coming at him and whatever, he sees them, he can maneuver and whatever. And I think what drives that for both Mbappe and Messi is that they have two things. I think, first of all, they have the mental capacity, the way they think about themselves and their sport, that can push them into this flowy state of mind, okay? In some way or sense, they can lower how they view the stakes at place, okay, which can then relax them. And then secondly, that they actually have a surplus of skills coming into the game. They are more skilled than the other players. And that is also what's helped them come into this matrix moment.
Can I ask also, too, as an outsider to the sport watching, I think what's interesting is the age difference. There's age differences all the time, of course. But in this particular situation, you have probably two of the three best players in the world playing. One happens to be 35. The other is 23. I find it fascinating that a young man of that age can get to that place so early.
Yeah. And who is the player you're referring to? That's 23.
Mbappe is 23 and Messi's 35.
Yeah. Now you're asking me about the sport that I'm actually completely uninterested in myself.
Now, you know why I would have set it up this way, right? Because every European growing up, so I would have assumed.
No, it's hockey for me. It's hockey for me. Unless it's a game like the one yesterday, or when Ronaldinho was playing in Barcelona, which I really enjoyed. I always enjoyed to watch someone that is completely in a different universe, skill-wise, mentally, and all these things. That's always like a pleasure to see. A great performer and what they do. But besides that, I think that soccer is It's almost like it puts me in a coma. I think it's too slow. I think it's too many missed passes. I think the players on the field are very wimpy, compared to my favorite sport, which is hockey. I mean, as soon as anyone comes close to them, okay, they fall down and, oh my God, and whatever it is. I think they care more about how they look. I can imagine that the Italian team, they probably spend more time fixing their hair in the locker room than actually practicing on the field. For me, it's sort of wimpy type of sport, but that's just the way I am.
That would have been every American guy's view probably growing up, because, most American guys are looking at baseball, football, basketball, hockey. So
baseball even puts me in a deeper coma than soccer.
Let me take you back in time. Here you are right now. People come to you for performance coaching expertise, insights, and you have that. And I can see that across your book, Intrinsic Motivation. However, there was a starting point. There was a place that you started. When was the moment in time where you started to understand this is the path that I'm going to go down? What was the trigger? What was the aha moment where you said, this is where I want to be? What was the insight? And then you said, okay, I can go this path. I can help people with this. When and where? How did that happen?
This is so interesting. And I'm going to take you a little bit. I'm going to take some time to explain this, because it really came to me when I wrote a book in Sweden together with a neuroscientist called Neuroleadership, or Neuroledarskap, which is the Swedish for the same thing. And then I just started to think, where does my obsession come from? Because I am completely obsessed with this space, human behavior, human performance, human learning, all these things. And I think there are a couple of experiences. Two of them go way back. The first one was when I came to first grade. I remember this like it was yesterday. I came to school for the first time. And very soon into that experience, I actually saw bullying for the first time. Other kids bullying other kids. And it just blew my mind and it disgusted me. I mean, how can you do that? There's no reason here. You're simply mean to the other kids. That was a very, very strong experience that I had. And that just sparked an interest in me. How is this even possible that you can do a thing like that? It also taught me something about myself.
Were they bullying you, or you were observing bullying of others?
I was observing bullying of others. And there is sort of a side story to this also, that I was pretty big when I was a kid. I was big and I was overweight and so forth. So I could actually, after some time, I figured out I could actually punish the bulliers. I could actually be mean to them. Then I also recognized that it gave me enormous pleasure. It gave me enormous pleasure to set the record straight. I also learned something else in that process, and that most of the kids that actually were engaged in bullying, it was not because they didn't know it was wrong. They engaged in it because they got some kind of reward. So that was actually my first meeting with the human reward system. But what happened after I intervened and basically bullied them back, or whatever I did to them, is that most of them actually stopped doing it, because the punishment was much greater than the reward. So they stopped doing it. But some of them continue doing it. And when I then hear about these people later in life, they didn't end up in a good place. There was something basically wrong with them. The more I thought about it, the more rich this experience becomes, and more important for me to engage in this path. The second experience I had, and I think that is basically the foundation of the book, was that I think I was turning 8. And for a reason I still don't understand, my mother rented a piano for me for my birthday. And we had not talked about that before. It was just there when I came home from school on my birthday. And then I become completely obsessed with the piano. I started to practice the piano every day. I had this dream that I wanted to sound a certain way and whatever. Very soon into it, I became really good playing the piano. And I think when I was 9.5, I started to compose my own songs and so forth. And then my piano skills was discovered at school. So I was invited to play for older students. I was invited to play for graduation. Now, what happened is that the piano completely overtook my universe. What happened is that, of course, my grades at school went down the drain. In a very, very rare moment of brilliance, I think I was 11 or 12, I was just thinking about myself. And I just realized that having these poor grades basically will cap my opportunities in terms of any type of higher education, whatever it is. But the problem was that school was so dull, it was so boring. How on earth am I going to do that? Because the piano makes me feel so alive and I'm engaged in it. And then in this rare moment of little brilliance, I asked myself, what if I can figure out what makes piano so extraordinary and magnificent? The experience of playing the piano and being engaged and thinking about playing the piano. What if I can figure out what makes that so wonderful and then apply that to other parts of my life? That's fundamentally what the book is about. The most important environment to actually master is the inner environment. It's what happens in you. It's how you think about things. That's the secret. Companies, organizations, they can change the environment any way they want. They can invest how much ever they want in employee experience. If the individuals in that organization don't understand that the most important environment to master is my internal environment and how I think about things, all these efforts will be limited. I think these two experiences has basically set me off in the path. And then when I entered into the professional world, I early on noticed that I had sort of a knack for helping people to become more successful. And that was from the very beginning when I entered in advertising when I was very young and started to work with colleagues. I had this interest in helping people out with their barriers, how they thought about things, to make them more successful, but also fundamentally feeling much more fulfilled about spending this immense time at work. Because if you don't find a way to really enjoy what you do, given the amount of time you spend at work, that's basically self-abuse in my world. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that these are some of the experiences I had when I was young, and that basically set me off on this path.
To share back with you, you're talking to somebody who put his first website up in 1996, complete free agent, not attached to any company. I've written 8 books, I've done 1,000+ podcast episodes. And to look at your work is what I was doing that I didn't know I was doing. Meaning I loved what I was doing all along for the last 20+ years. I've been compensated for it, but it's the love of it. Sometimes people ask me, they say, hey, why do you do that podcast, Mike? Do you make a lot of money off that podcast? And I think to myself, hold on, why are you asking that question? Everyone knows there's only probably like Joe Rogan makes a lot of money. Maybe Tim Ferriss makes a couple podcasts make a lot of money. So why would someone do a podcast with 1,000+ episodes over 10 years? You do it because, for example, I get a chance to talk to you. I get a chance to talk to so many people. It becomes, which is the theme of your work, it's loving what you do. You don't have that. What do you got?
I'm a big fan of people cultivating, the people I work with, cultivating almost a crazy dream. No dream is crazy enough. And the way I approach it is that I say to people, let's come up with a crazy dream. It really would inspire you to work toward. Now, the dream can be too crazy to actually be realized. But one thing I'm certain about, if you have a crazy dream and you let it energize you in the present moment, you might not be able to reach that dream, but a crazy dream will take you to crazy good places. And I have a gazillion examples of that from my client base, and I have a gazillion examples of that myself. If you, Michael, would have told me, let's say, 7-8 years ago, that, Stefan, I predict that at some point, I would say in 3.5, 4 years, you will sit in a room in Virginia Beach with a bunch of Navy SEALs people that you're going to start to work with. I probably would have said to you, Michael, why don't you take your medication and relax? Why on earth would like to have anything to do with me, anything to do with me. I have no background from the military and no background from the special ops. I'm basically a guy been operating in the business world, whatever, and these people are in a completely different universe performance-wise. You never know. If you dare to dream crazy, that really energizes you, and it becomes meaningful for you, you are much more likely to create a deeper purpose in what you do in the present moment and really think deeply and hard about how to make those experiences relevant for the dream, but also meaningful in the moment.
You mentioned Virginia Beach. I'm currently in the state of Virginia. I have family that grew up in that area. But how long ago did you teach SEALs in Virginia Beach? Just to ask you, is that recent?
That's like 4 years ago.
The reason I ask, not to bring up any names, but a handful of years ago, I lived in San Diego. I became friends with a Navy SEAL that I did not know he was a Navy SEAL at first. But anyways, he's been in Virginia Beach for the last 10 years. I'm sure you probably had contact with him, so I'm not going to mention any names.
I have to say to you, Michael, I have never met in the same room a bunch of more well-rounded, nice, centered people in my life. They were the nicest people. And a couple of them have become what I regard as close friends. We're still very much in touch and whatnot. So the scope of what I was working on, of course, we had some change of how to think about things, work with your mental capacity and all these things. But the main scope was also to help some of them that really wanted to get a second career outside of the SEALs organization, basically in a corporation or whatever. That was the main focus of what I did with them.
Let me flip it on you for a second to try and unpack, because we're kind of talking about the high achievers and you talk about a Navy SEAL. There is some intrinsic motivation there to begin with. But so many people that I bump into these days, they open their mouth to start to tell me about their life or whatever they're doing. I immediately get complaints. They feel sorry for themselves. There's all this just shit that I just want to say, well, why are you wasting your time? You only live one time. Why are you going down that path? You've got ways to bring people like that into your world. How do you, when you first, of course, you can choose who you get to work with, and you like to choose high performers, and SEALs are generally not walking around complaining, but you will, across your career, come across contact people that are in that headspace that I just described. How do you start to bring people into your world if they're already embedded in this defeatist, woe is me perspective on the world? How do you bring them in?
Two things. First of all, I have some rules of engagement. When you engage with me, you're not allowed to complain. You're not allowed to blame anyone for anything. You basically need to be perfectly accountable for your own thoughts and your own feelings. There's a whole set of stuff there. That in itself is instantly effective for most people. But then secondly, and this is so obvious, it's almost perplexing that organizations don't really understand this. I educate my clients about the human mind, how it actually operates. What I say to them is, don't take this personal, but you're born with a pre-configured mindset or a mind. The pre-configuration is a result of evolution. And what you need to understand is that your mind, its pre-configuration is so much shaped of a completely different time than the time you live in now. We have existed for, I don't know what the latest number is, but let's say 200,000 years. And 199,900 of those years, we have lived in a situation where food is scarce, necessities are scarce, threats are imminent, and all these things. So that means you have a pre-configured mind that basically have three priorities. And two of them are so strong, so they almost kill the third priority. The two strong priorities is to conserve energy, because that's been the key survival strategy for us, to always have a surplus of energy, because we didn't know when we're going to eat, we didn't know when we're going to fight, we didn't know when we're going to blah, 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 and so forth. So that's the one. And it's so strong and it's ever present to conserve energy. The big complication here is that thinking draws a lot of energy. We are pretty hesitant about spending our time thinking, which is a big paradox. If you compare, for instance, when you run a marathon, the average person burns around 2,500 calories. a professional chess player playing a tournament, he or she can burn as much as 6,000 calories during a tournament day and then lose 2 pounds. Deliberate thinking draws a lot of energy. The first priority is to conserve energy, and that gives basically the mind so many reasons to come up with all these, what I call bullshit thoughts about stuff, blaming others and so forth. The second main priority is to make us very risk averse. And then the third little priority we have that is almost always killed by the two other ones is to pursue learning, to pursue expansion. What I do with clients is to try to explain this in layman terms, to give them some kind of deeper self-understanding for why do I behave this way. And most of them almost instantly say, yeah, that makes so much sense. Now I understand myself. And this is the paradox, I think, in the business world and whatnot, that you lead an organization, but you don't have any deeper understanding actually of the human condition. It's almost like saying, oh, I want to work in finance. So what do you know about finance? I know nothing about finance. Well, then you cannot work in finance.
How does anyone advance if you're stuck with that kind of a label? I mean, most people that come into whatever field are outsiders. That's the way it works. And then you figure it out.
So basically, there are 3 areas you need to master in order to master your mind. One is to make it a habit to think in terms of exciting outcomes. That should just be automatic. Whatever you do, just think in exciting outcomes. I have this super boring task. Okay, how can I think about that in a way that makes it exciting? That's one area. The second area, you need to learn problem solving because the mind is so infested with brain flaws in how it processes information. If you go right without understanding how it works, you're basically just lucky. And then the third area is social skills, because life is full with constraints, and most of those constraints are other people operating exactly as you do. But if you look at boredom and complaints and all these things, most professionals that I meet, and even some of the high-performing ones, they are too much involved in what I call activity-focused behavior. And that is that they basically perform most of their activities based on habits. And what happens when you perform something on habit is that you don't spend so much thinking about how you actually should pursue those activities. And what happens over time is that repeating the way you perform a task or activity over and over again, it doesn't lead to improvement of performance. What it leads to is a decrease of effort when you perform the activity, which actually means that you will actually perform the activity worse when you perform it over and over again. Furthermore, performing an activity the same way over and over and over again, it also makes it boring. And that's part of the dissatisfaction that people have at their work. So also understanding these things is super important for people. And you have seen the movie A Few Good Men, I guess, Michael, with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. Sometimes when I talk with people, I experience this A Few Good Men situation when Jack Nicholson is on the stand and then Tom Cruise is putting his career at stake and then he's pushing him to tell the truth. And then sometimes I can feel like Jack Nicholson, you want the truth, you cannot handle the truth. This is, of course, my truth based on whatever my experience working with hundreds of organizations, thousands of people, is that most people I meet, given the fact that they've been operating on habit or engaging in this activity-focused behavior, they actually gradually over time become incompetent for their positions. Because what happens in business, you know this as well as I do, is that the business environment is changing constantly. And with that also actually the requirements of you and in your job. But that is not so transparent for people. But that's what happens. When people claim that, oh, I have too much to do, I cannot do that. That's mass hysteria. When I walk on the streets of New York and I overhear people talk and they meet on the streets, oh, how are you? Oh, I have too much to do. I still have to meet the person that has too much to do. When I meet the person that says, oh, I have too much to do. Okay, let's sit down. Let's go through all the stuff on your plate. Let's take this first thing. You tell me now, what's the purpose of that? What is the outcome you need to achieve when you do that? And how should you achieve that outcome? And they are clueless. They cannot even explain that. Not only are they complaining having too much to do, they have not spent any time thinking about how actually to execute these things on their plate.
It's amazing that there's an unlimited number of people, most likely, that will pay for your services for you to come in and tell them things they don't want to hear. And you've put yourself in a position to where you can say exactly what you want and they will pay you, and they really don't want to hear it. They really don't want to hear the truth that you're giving them.
I always operate in a very privileged channel. What I mean with that, it's the one-on-one. That's also a choice I made because I was fairly effective as an executive. I've achieved 4 turnarounds of companies. And I did that basically by being extremely systematic in making sure that people understood that the key priority in our organization are not actually the business goals. It is personal and professional development. Every day, you need to do something better, something different. You need to innovate yourself in some little aspect. I don't care if it's big. I don't care if it's small. That's required. If you don't do this, this is not the place for you. And the logic for that is, of course, all our business goals are beyond what we can achieve today. And how on earth are we going to achieve them if not everyone in this organization actually push themselves and develop every day? And I was good at putting that on the agenda. I mean, that's the work I did during these years is also what set me off on this track to even think about writing a book about what I did. And that was basically that when Dan Pink wrote about me in Drive, the work I did as an executive. When I decided to go and work as a coach, I just figured out that probably being an outsider of an organization, being a consultant, you're basically a guest in the organization. It's so different to be an executive, be part of it, because that in itself gives you instant credibility because you're part of the gang, so to speak. You're part of the organization. And you can show that you actually practice what you preach and all these things. When you're an outsider, and this is terrible to say, but you risk becoming just entertainment. You're not part of the gang. People like to listen to you and all these things and blah, blah, blah. So that was one reason that I chose this one-on-one, face-to-face. A second reason why I chose that is, of course, in an individual conversation, I can play so much hardball with anyone. I can make them lose face. I can make them cry. I can make them everything. But it's such a secure environment for them. They are not showing their development areas or their vulnerability, in public, so to speak. So I choose that channel to work in.
Let me keep it at a word that you brought up a few minutes ago, the word exciting. And I find, I'll use this podcast as an example, this process of starting a podcast on a lark, doing 1,000+ episodes, 7 Nobel Prize winners and counting, all kinds of interesting people like yourself. I find myself excited to do it every time. And I don't think people like you would want to even talk with me if I wasn't excited. Now, on the flip side, I can look at peers and other people and whatnot, and I can see that there starts to become, in the information world, there starts to become a dialing in process, an autopilot process. They're really not even having a conversation. I would get Stefan on the podcast. I'll ask him this list of questions. I'll put it out there. And I find that naturally, and I'm not even sure why, but when I hear you use the word exciting, I look at myself inwardly. I'm like, why am I always excited every day? Whatever little project I'm doing, it's exciting. And I think sometimes people will look at me and they say, you seem strange. Why are you so excited about this? It's just fun. The question ultimately for you is, how do you get people to this mindset of exciting if it's not naturally something that was either built into them or learned?
You and I, we seem to be almost identical. Imagine we did something together. We changed the world. When I wrote this book, I asked my son, Ramses, I need to write something about myself. What should I write? Well, I think you should be honest. Write that you're crazy. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, you're like a kid. You're the only person in the universe. You can't be bored. You're excited about everything, which is true. I can even drum up excitement when I do my tax return here in the US.
I'm not as good as you on that yet. I got to get better there.
I promise you, spend 10 minutes to think through that and you will find a way to make it exciting. I think that there are certain things you need to do with yourself. There's a methodology to it, of course, and it's very much focused on these exciting outcomes. The aphrodisiac to make things exciting is to think about the value you bring to others. I know we live in this completely individualistic society when everybody should think about their own needs and all that bullshit. Please, good luck trying to figure out your needs, because the inner world is too ambiguity. 1 o'clock you think you have this needs, 2 o'clock you think you have that needs, or whatever it is. That's a never-ending story, and it leads basically to anxiety and depression, I would say, if you think too much about your needs. Thinking about what is the value. If I perform this task in a magnificently fantastic way, what is the value I bring to someone? If you look at an organization, everything that happens in an organization, everything I do, the purpose of that is to enable someone else to do something else. In the simplest form, enable them not to do the work I'm supposed to do, but always bring some value. That's one thing. There's certain things about thinking about exciting outcomes. Think about the value you bring to others with this task. That can make even the most boring, cumbersome, even difficult, even scary task enjoyable, because then you have to think about how to pursue that, creating that value. You can think about reducing time for the tasks. Okay, usually it takes me like 2 hours to do this. Is there any way I can do it in 30 minutes and still achieve that result? Oh, Jesus, stuff happens in your head. Or you can think about quality. Can I produce a perfect result in one go? Or can I produce much more using the same time? If you really think about these things, most of the tasks and activities and even situations you're in, you can manage them and make them exciting. But besides that, I also think there are a couple of life principles you need to subscribe to. One is to never accept boredom. That's one. The second one, and this is so paramount, when I talk to people about that they basically are activity-based and they don't renew themselves, they basically do the same things, they don't agree with me at first. They say, well, in our organization, we have all these change initiatives, we have all this, we have all this, and blah, 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 going on, okay, and we have all these new things. So what you say doesn't make sense. Then I ask them, well, how much of everything that you actually are talking about, bringing data to the cloud, doing a digital transformation, all these buzzwords that's swimming around today, how much of that is actually executed? And then they become quiet because they have almost like a discussion club talking about everything you should do, all the new stuff is one thing. Actually doing it is another thing. And most people don't do that. They don't even pursue it. It's sort of the knowing-doing gap or whatever it is.
They don't hold themselves accountable either.
No. Having some kind of life principle, this is what I say to all my clients, because I only basically have one important rule between me and clients, and that is if we agree that you should try out this approach for these situations from now on until our next coaching session, I will hold you accountable for that. And if you don't pursue this and you don't give me a heads up, if for whatever legit reason you could not do it, I will cancel you. That's it. Because the life principle you need to adhere to is never ever say you're going to do something and then you don't do it. Be very mindful about when you say, yes, I'm going to do that. You need to be damn sure you're actually going to do it. Because this is part of, if you really want to degenerate yourself, you should live a life where you say you're going to do a lot of stuff and you never do it. Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, it will erode your self-confidence. And you will walk around and not being happy about who you are and what you actually do, because you know that you're saying all these things.
I can't speak to every other country, but growing up as an American, the message that you're giving, this would have been the kind of message that I would have heard in the 80s in high school and whatnot. And then America shifted in the last 25 years, especially the last 10 years, where I think America is a lot more of the And I'm not saying this necessarily as a pejorative or to be mean, but a lot more of the Oprah, Dr. Phil thing where it's let's sit down and talk about every negative thing forever. And people spend hours and weeks and months and years lamenting and talking about all of the so-called negative things they can dream up or something negative that happened to them. But very rarely do I flip on a CNN or a Fox or an ABC or an NBC. And very rarely do I ever hear somebody giving the unvarnished truth that you're giving. So you know that you're at a level to where you can pick and choose and you're getting people that want what you have to say. But we're in a minority of the tail of the bell curve. The vast majority of people don't want to hear what you have to say.
I totally agree with you. As Western civilization, we're on some kind of path. People should be so protected and people should do this. We have what's it called, microaggressions. I don't even know what that is. All these things. And it's interesting. The only way you can make something a system of sorts, whether it's a human being or IT system or whatever in our universe, stronger, is to try to identify the weaknesses in it and then improve them. The way we want to treat people and the way we treat people to safeguard them from any type of the true constraints in life, to navigate the challenges, you need to deal with failure. You need to really learn about being comfortable with psychological pain, because pain of any sorts is a sign of that you actually have something to develop. It's nothing bad. It's actually just a sign that, okay, I'm in a moment of growth now. I just need to figure it out. But it's almost like if we try to just move or transfer how we tend to talk about people into, for instance, developing an IT system or like a software, how do we make sure that this software is really working well? The best way to do it is not to have any users on it, because the users will then figure out weaknesses in the software. One thing, if you look at the human reward system, I'm not going to complain about media or whatever, but I agree with you that the sentiment in the media is that people basically are victims all the time. So there's a lot of irrational pampering going on and focusing on the negative and all these things. If you look at, for instance, healthcare, one of the biggest challenges with a person getting well from, let's say, going through rehabilitation after surgery or having back pain or whatever it is, the biggest challenge is actually the spouse of that person that acknowledges when the person is complaining about pain and all these things. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, my God. Yeah, you're in such pain and whatever. Because then that acknowledgement becomes a reward for the person in pain. Instead of that person, okay, yeah, I understand you have a lot of pain, but let's focus on what we can do about it. Let's focus on the solutions to this. And that's a fact. That's a scientific fact. That's part of the challenges in healthcare.
To share with you on this healthcare issue, living in a place like Saigon for many years, like I have, and you get to know people and you have conversations about the different structures of government and the systems in different governments and stuff like that. In many countries, there's no safety net. And when there's no safety net, it's amazing what can happen. In America, you've got a huge safety net. I'm not going to put a one-to-one connection and say that the safety net in America has necessarily caused America to be the most obese country in the world. But I live in a country that's the least obese country in the world, and it doesn't have a safety net. So I think sometimes if people are not responsible, if they're just told there's a big daddy out there and big daddy is going to pat them on the head or take care of them or all that kind of stuff, people don't really even want to live that way. They know deep down they don't want to live that way, but they'll take the safety net. They'll take all the freebies and all that kind of stuff. And then what happens? They're vastly unhappy because they don't have a daily challenge. They don't have anything. They don't have the title of your book. They don't have the intrinsic motivation. Then they just complain their whole damn life.
You're spot on. Remember what I said about the pre-configured mind and its priorities. Save energy. Of course, if you get the freebie, you jump on it.
But it's never really free, is it?
No. It's never, because at the end of the day, you're actually paying for it yourself. And what's at stake here? This is, I think, the beauty of some of the stuff I represent. It's about creating a balance in your life between these priorities of the mind saving energy, being risk averse, but then learning new things. And that's the tiny little brother of the priorities that are almost always killed by the other two. But how do you make that stronger? And then think about what's at stake. Is that to help your company to make more money? Well, that's not the primary purpose. What's at stake here is actually your brain health. Because daily learning and development is one of 5 levers for good brain health. And this is something I learned just a few years back when I got in contact with Dr. John Arden. He's written a gazillion books on brain health. And we started to cooperate and collaborate a little bit. So the 5 levers are sleep, diet, exercise, education, daily education and learning, and then social life, the quality of your social life. If you look at education, I think science recommends that you should spend about 2 hours every day learning something new. And learning something new could be performing a task in a new way, performing a new task, learning something new about the colleague that you work with a lot, meeting a new person, and so forth. And brain health, what I learned, I didn't know that. I thought that the brain's health is one separate thing, and then the overall body's health is one thing. It all starts and ends with the brain health. And if you engage in daily learning, not only go your short-term performance up, your long-term performance, your sense of well-being, your sense of accomplishment and all these things, but you also build something else, cognitive reserve. What is cognitive reserve? Well, it basically makes your brain much stronger. So should it be damaged, let's say you get Alzheimer's or whatever, you will deal with that in a much better way. It's actually your health at stake here. It's not just we're talking about the company, its performance or whatever, your career or whatever. It's something more fundamentally at stake.
What's so amazing about this topic, of course, you're out there on the forefront of it, but this is the kind of learning, the kind of subject, the kind of understanding that while we are bombarded, and you mentioned the media a second ago, while we're bombarded with the messages about this and that and all these other kind of things, this intrinsic motivation, if this could be where people start, where they can learn at a young age, you mentioned age 5 or 6, observing bullies, the whole world changes. The whole world changes naturally. Also, what's really nice about this, it's a decentralized approach. It's basically saying to each individual, you are a decentralized node of the whole system. And if you raise yourself up, boom, great things are going to happen. As opposed to where you just see the technocrats, the bureaucrats, the political names, whatever the country is, especially America, especially Europe, it's all this top down, we're going to control you, back to the Matrix, but the Matrix in a bad way, the Matrix where the people are lying in beds on feeding tubes. This path that you've gone down, whether people already know something about it or whether they're going to learn about it, if you can go this direction, your entire life changes, the world changes. It might sound silly to people, but it's true.
It's true. And it's instant. Living in this space that you live in and I live in, we know that it requires constant effort.
You can tell that just by talking to me that I'm already in your crazy headspace.
Of course you are, based on your own questions and based on how we play together when we talk. But it requires constant effort and mindful reflection of how actually am I governing myself? How am I managing myself? It's about fundamentally rewiring your brain, leveraging the neuroplasticity of the brain, and to repeat good thinking habits, I would say, thinking in terms of exciting outcomes. In my world, I have realized that my key priority in life that just enables me to find excitement in everything is that I have a mind focused on learning.
That's the exciting thing.
That's the excitement. And I think that that excitement is also there potentially under the surface by design. Because if you think about it, the human beings as a biological system, any type of biological system, in order to survive, needs to collectively and individually learn by being in the environment to become stronger. Why? Because that actually increases the likelihood that they would survive over time. So I think that this excitement is in us, but it's very weak. We need to cultivate it. I'll give you an example. I just think that it's important to develop red alerts. Like, I'm going down the wrong path. So I have several red alerts in my brain that just pops up automatically. For instance, when I feel super certain about something, and that goes back to one of your fantastic guests, Kahneman. Whenever I feel really certain about that this is a great idea, this belief I have is actually completely the truth, and blah, 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 a red alert goes off because I know that now I'm missing something. I'm missing something that is essential. And I'm too much in love with my belief. I'm too much in love with my idea, whatever it is. So I'm missing vital things. And the risk is then that I start to sort everything I experience, just acknowledge everything that confirms my belief or my idea. Then I basically discount everything else. That just slows me down in my thinking process. Another thing is that, and this is just a very recent history, I decided to get a driver's license for the first time in my life. I've never been interested in that. So anyway, my wife, she went to LA to visit her daughter. She goes on college there. So I decided, okay, I'm going to rent a car. And I just had a driver's license, I think, for 4 weeks. I'm going to rent a car and I'm going to practice. Because what I really felt super uncomfortable with, Michael, was to get out on the highway and then change lanes in high speed. That just gave me immense discomfort. So I rented a car on the Friday, planned to go out on the Saturday. The first thing that happens is that my mind comes up with all these bullshit excuses. But Stefan, should you really do this now? I mean, you're super tired. You've been working so much. You have the book on top of everything else you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Because that was my anxiety over this moment of taking the car going out on highway. Obviously, the Friday was a terrible day. I had a hard time concentrating because I had a high level of anxiety. And then Friday night comes and my brain is still telling me, oh, don't take the car tomorrow. Leave it in the garage. Take a walk in Central Park. Enjoy it. Be proud of yourself. You have a book coming out. You have good clients, blah, blah, blah. All these excuses. Woke up Saturday morning, hadn't slept well, sitting there, and my brain is just telling me, no, don't do it, relax. But then the red alert comes up, bang, and it comes up in the shape of a question. Now, if you don't do this today, Stefan, if you don't take the car out and practice this and try to feel a little bit more secure and skilled in these situations that you think is so uncomfortable, that means that every time you rent a car or you get the car or you buy a car, whatever, and you're going to take the car with Regina, my wife, and go out driving, you're going to feel this anxiety. That means that the day before, the day is probably going to be destroyed because you're going to be nervous for what's going to come. And then the morning when you wake up, you're not going to sleep well. Is that the life you want to have? The answer is so simple. No, of course not. So I went to the garage, took the car, and I drove down to Atlantic City, on and off highways, changing lanes. So that's it. It's having this red alert. I call it developing a brain that serves you well, that doesn't hinder you or even actually destroy your life. It actually makes your life better.
You have great stuff. We could talk forever. One of the things that I've loved on this podcast, and I've had, I don't know if exact peers of yours, but a lot of people in the psych space. You mentioned Daniel Kahneman. I had Anders Ericsson on here, the deliberate practice professor. Before he passed, he was great. I've not had Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's still going, isn't he?
No. He also passed last year.
Oh, did he? Oh,
I knew Anders too. We did some stuff.
That was one of my favorite episodes I did on this podcast. I mean, he was just so sweet, so nice. Of course, everything he would say was just, you're like writing notes down. That's one of those kind of guys. But listen, I appreciate it. I would love to chat with you again. I mean, this is great stuff. The book, Intrinsic Motivation, Learn to Love Your Work and Succeed as Never Before. Is there a website you would like to direct people to? The book will be on Amazon and all that kind of fun stuff. But is there a website?
Yes. And the website is learntoloveyourwork.com.
There you go. Can't forget that one. Well, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on here in this holiday season.
Thank you very much, Michael. And please stay in touch. Why don't you send me an email so we are connected, okay?
Absolutely. Take care, sir.
Stay safe.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.